Okay, so I did pull Albedo first, and I do plan on making a video about him, but this feels more important. Hello, and welcome to the Varka video, which is ostensibly gonna be a little bit less of a guide and more me talking about the community perceptions of Varka and my experience with him. Because hoo boy, is Varka a contentious and misunderstood unit. Because after all the doom posting, after all the insane takes that I've seen on Varka, after getting him, they don't make any sense to me. Well, maybe they do make a little bit of sense, because Varka, after playing him for a decent amount of time, is a unit that escapes traditional ideas of what a strong unit in Genshin is. Because wait for it, Varka does a bit less damage than the other 5 stars that are coming out. I don't want to completely downplay his weaknesses, because Varka does have somewhat significant weaknesses compared to other 5 stars that are recently coming out. His best team does deal a good amount less damage than the current best in slot Nod Cry teams, and he certainly has some clunk in his gameplay that units like Flint's, Sibai, even Nefer with her dash cancels that a lot of people don't like, they generally feel easier and smoother to play than Varka. And to optimize his damage, he has some somewhat tight team restrictions. My problem comes in when people see these team restrictions and the damage not being on par with Nod Cry units and stopping there. They just say, well, that's it, Varka's weak and restrictive, don't bother pulling him. But having less damage than Nod Cry carries does not make him weak, and having team restrictions does not inherently make him restrictive. If he was really as weak and restrictive as many people seem to think he is, this wouldn't be possible. Varka is clearly a Stygian capable unit, and I wouldn't have had an answer into the Secret Source Automaton if not for Varka. The first cycle of Stygian was the only one that I didn't clear on Fearless, and that was because of this robot. And just a quick little aside about Stygian, I specifically am talking about my Fearless clear with Varka, because that's the level at which I find Stygian to be fun on my account. Stygian is a, let's be honest, pretty poorly designed mode, but that's probably intentional, where they design each boss to want a very specific combination of things, and if you don't have that specific combination of things, it can be kinda not fun. Stygian is not a mode where you should necessarily be full clearing every time if all you're doing is pulling units that you like and skipping units that you don't like. I got lucky enough that I liked a lot of the recent units, so I was able to pull them and get through a lot of Fearless Stygians, but it's entirely possible in the future more units are gonna come out that I don't like, and I'm gonna be pushed back down to menacing like what happened on Escoffier's debut. I didn't care about her, I didn't pull her, so I just didn't clear the boss, and that was fine. I played to the level that was enjoyable on my own account. At my personal level of investment, with the weapons I have on my account, with my artifacts, with my teams, that made Fearless Varka fun. In general, I just don't do Dire at all because I don't vertically invest in units very much. I don't get a lot of weapons or constellations, so those higher DPS checks are just unachievable for a lot of my teams. So I don't engage with it because it's not fun for me. Essentially, everybody's account is going to be different. Everybody has a different combination of units, of artifacts, of weapons, and different Stygians are going to be different amounts of fun and doable for different people. So find the level that you can enjoy and do that, instead of pulling your hair out because someone at Hoyo said you need to be pulling this one specific unit. Okay, back to the main video. Despite having team restrictions, Varka is very possibly the most flexible carry in the game. Now, before I explain this, of course, we have to talk about what Varka does. Pressing E puts him into the Sturm und Drang state, where he gets increased scaling on his attacks that is dependent on the level of his skill. So just a heads up, don't level his normals, only level his skill. His left-handed claymore gets infused with Animo, while his right-handed one stays physical. This is because, if you look at my party, I only have a Geo unit and an Animo unit. If I instead put in a unit of a Feck element, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo, Varka's right-handed claymore will absorb that element and start doing corresponding damage. And looking at his multipliers, of course he hits twice with most of his attacks because he has 2 claymores. The larger multiplier on all of his attacks is the infused claymore. So he is able to infuse his normal attacks to do any one of those 4 elements, and that element will make up the majority of his damage. So Varka can become a Pyro DPS, a Hydro DPS, an Electro DPS, or of course a Cryo DPS. So how does this not just make him the best DPS in the game? Let's open the kit back up and look at these multipliers and recognize that these are not very high. 150% motion value, another 150%. This is around 210%. All of its hits hover around the 150 to 250 mark, and he's a Claymore DPS, so he's not the fastest. Like, comparing to Navia's normal attacks, they're really similar, and Navia is not a normal attacker. Her normal attacks make up a decent portion of her damage, but the majority of damage comes from her skill. Her normal attacks are a bit more of an afterthought. Varka, in comparison, does do the majority of his damage through his normal attacks. So is he really as terrible as people are saying? No, of course not. He has a way to boost his multipliers. His Ascension 1 passive is where his restrictions come in, where he asks that there be 2 Animo units in your team, and of course he counts as 1, so you only need 1 extra, and 2 units with swirlable elements of the same element. Meeting one of these conditions makes all these scalings 140% of what they were, so it gives them a 40% boost, but meeting both of these conditions makes him deal 220% of his additional scalings, more than doubling these values. And additionally, he has a secondary, more minor restriction of having another hex unit in the team, because of course he himself is a hex unit. I kind of skipped talking about his second skill, but this is where that comes in, I guess. Upon going into his infusion stance, he gets a secondary skill. Hitting the enemy with normal attacks reduces its cooldown. Normally it's by half a second, but getting a second hex unit will increase that cooldown reduction to a full second, making it much easier and more consistent for Varka to get 2 of those special skills within his infusion window. These special skills are kind of interesting because you actually have 2 different options of what to do with them. You can either tap the skill button again and he'll just do a little plunge AoE that does a decent chunk of damage, or instead, if you do a charged attack, he'll do an enhanced 2-hit charged attack, or really 4-hit because he hits 2 times with each claymore. The skill version is generally the better version. It does a bit less damage, but it hits faster. Most of his best combos use that, but the charged attack is so close that if you're like me and you just enjoy the feel of the charged attack, you can use that instead. In any case, he has a soft hex requirement if he wants to be getting 2 of these skills, which again is another small DPS increase that he can get, then he really does want another hex unit in this party. So with all these things in mind, it makes sense to see how people would call him restrictive. He has these really tightly controlled teams where you want another Animo unit and then 2 units who have swirlable elements of the same element. So the only units triggering reactions in these teams are your Animo units triggering swirls. There are use cases where you can deviate from these comps and use units that are good enough to make up for your lost scaling. For example, Melt. Melt also doubles the damage of the hit that triggered it. It's clunkier and it's less consistent, but it can be a reason to not use this prescribed Varka best in slot team structure. But frankly, I think there are just far too many options within this team structure for it to be as restrictive as many people are saying it is. This is Varka's current best in slot team, and I think people over-focus on this team way too much. People boil him down to essentially just being another pyro carry because they think that no other team matters other than this one. This idea of best team brain rot is really what infuriates me the most about Varka, because yeah, this is his best team, and generally a lot of his other teams don't play that much differently, but the fact that you can swap out Durin and Bennett for Shenhe and Layla of all units and still get a compelling Fearless clear is what makes Varka so powerful. Yes, it's worse than his best in slot team, but it's obviously not worse enough that it matters to the hardest reward granting content in the game. Now, I don't want to play up how good this team is because this was not an easy clear. This took me a few hours of optimization, but without Varka, I wouldn't have had anything. The Cryo Automaton is an extremely limiting boss. I mean, that's just how Stygian is. That's how they design it. They design it to make you feel bad for not pulling specific units. And this guy was designed for Escoffier and or Skirk. I do not have Escoffier and or Skirk. Its mechanic, of course, it goes into this very high resist state and gains a special bar that slowly goes up over time. But if you hit it with cryo attacks, that bar loses progress, and if the bar drops low enough, it will eventually start taking damage as normal. At higher levels of difficulty, it takes more and more cryo to keep this bar down, so it asks that you have multiple cryo units all applying cryo. Without Skirk or Escoffier, this can be very, very difficult. Both of them are damage dealers that center around having a full team of cryo or hydro teammates. Premium units where if you want to unlock the majority of their damage, you're going to need multiple cryo units. Without them, it can be very, very hard to make a team that both has enough cryo units that are applying enough cryo to keep the bar down, but still make a team that meets the DPS check. Before anybody suggests, yes, I've tried Shenhe Wriothesley, I've tried Shenhe Ayaka. They don't quite meet the check by either damage or application. It can be very, very difficult to optimize with these. I don't have much interest in either of these characters, so I kinda had sentenced myself to just never clearing the automaton. But then Varka comes along and gives me another team that meets these conditions. He asks for 2 units of swirlable elements. He asks for animo units that can absorb and reapply other elements, and of course, he is one of those animo units that absorbs and reapplies other elements. He deals most of his damage as cryo damage in this team. I want to emphasize again, this wasn't a free or easy clear. I did it by the skin of my teeth. And I did have to optimize this for about an hour and a half on stream. It wasn't easy, but it was fun, it was interesting, and it is not going to be the last time I do this type of thing. So a fun editor's note, for my Stygian stream and while I was recording this video, I was at talent level 9 on Varka's skill. I have since crowned his skill, and it has become far easier to clear the automaton. I did it first try, so I figured I might as well go back and get a recording for this video. And for those who want to see it, that clear will be at the end of this video. And yes, I could have done this very easily if I just pulled Skirk or Escoffier, but that's the point. I didn't have to do that. Just on a personal level, I don't really like Skirk or Escoffier. I'd rather not be able to do certain content than pull them just to deal with that content. But also pulling either of them would only deal with my cryo shill. Varka is less proficient in cryo stuff than Skirk and Escoffier are, but he also has 3 other elements he can fall back to. And that is where Varka's true strength lies. He's not going to automatically solve your problems for any one type of content, but he's a very good band-aid solution onto a ton of different types of content. Once the Skirk Abyss comes out, I'm gonna be able to do Cryo Varka into that. If we ever get another Arlecchino rerun and get a Pyro normal attack damage bonus in Abyss, Varka's going to be able to abuse that. Yes, it sucks that he is restricted to mono teams for his best teams, but the fact that he can make 4 different compelling mono teams makes it harder for Varka to be straight up unusable in any piece of content. If you're going up against enemies with immunities or particularly high resistances to specific elements, you can just swap Varka's element. I already mentioned that he definitely pays for his overall team flexibility when it comes to raw DPS. He can't hit the same heights as other specialized units like Skirk, like Varesa and Flynn's, like Mawika, and also he just doesn't have the best feeling general gameplay. As a Claymore unit, his normals are fairly slow, and I know a lot of people can tend to have a problem with Claymore normals. I've gotten used to them. I think he feels better than at least my initial testings, but also something that we're gonna have to swap out the test dummy to see. He just doesn't have the greatest interruption resistance. Oh wow. That went better than I expected it to. He can easily get staggered out of his combos. He doesn't even get interruption resistance in his constellations. It's kind of funny. That's why I chose to bring Layla against the Cryo Automaton. Not only is she particularly strong against it because of how much she hits with Cryo and how good she is at reducing the bar, but her shield gives a very nice comfort option to Varka, who kind of likes to have shields. So let's just do a quick test. Even though, I don't really like the DPS dummy that much, I really do not want to have it featured in much content anymore. I think I put it in the Flynn's 101 more than I really liked. I think getting to see your DPS really emboldens a lot of people to be really stupid about the game, because in reality, the test dummy is not really representative of any in-game experience at all. Not only do enemies usually move around and attack you, which would definitely affect your DPS, and also in a team like this, you're not really able to notice how bad Varka's interruption resistance is unless you're playing against an enemy that is actively attacking you. But it's very rare that we even get enemies like this anymore that just have neutral resistances across across the board and that aren't trying to shill any specific type of team combination. So in reality, best teams are often determined by what content you're playing into and not by any big number that you see on the screen when you're doing DPS testing. And I think Varka was a particular victim of this, because now let's just do our proper rotations.
Teamwork is dreamwork. Brace yourself. Think you can get away?
Thunder! Decay! New life!
Everybody stand back. But yahoo! Time for takeoff.
Thunder!
Okay. After 2 rotations, I can hit 105k DPS, which is fine. It is enough to beat most content in the game. I do have Venti Sig and Durance Sig and an R5 Serpent Spine, so this is probably a little bit higher than what you can expect out of more free-to-play weapon options. But people see this, they say, oh my god, Varka is doing 40k less DPS than the Nod Cry teams in his best team, and all of his other teams do like 30k less? He's a horrible unit. He sucks. He's disgusting. But the truth is that combat is almost never like this. Enemies being enemies that move around and attack are going to affect your combos. They're going to affect how much you can hit, and they're going to drop your DPS numbers. Certain enemies are going to have certain shield mechanics that increase or decrease their own resistances or your own character's stats. My point is that in general, this number here is never actually going to be the number that you get when you're playing against real content in game. And Varka is uniquely positioned to take advantage of a lot of shield mechanics that aren't necessarily meant for him. For example, the Cryo Automaton. So there we go. There are kind of my general thoughts about Varka. I wanted to make this a bit of a shorter video. He's a unit whose strengths are not immediately obvious, and in fact, some of his weaknesses to seem to be a bit more pronounced, but he still is a strong enough unit. It's just that the way the game is talked about, and often the tools that we use to talk about the game, betray his weaknesses and don't necessarily highlight his strengths very well. Thank you to my channel members for enabling me. Tylee, Aqua, Tayday, Pop Roxy, Starnova, Smoothie, Maho Shoujo Ruru, TSI Amat, Bab, DB, Buffalo Milk, Big Soup, Roberto Desu, Beef Potato, Mudkip, Zach ZDR, Dades, Rumpaltas, Najodo, and Dorsal Fin 1 from twitch.tv/DorsalFin1. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my members again for supporting. Hope you learned something, and happy Varking, everybody.
Take your true form. Oh, nice. Here we go. Think you can get away?
Freeze!
My will embodied by ordinance divine. The night is cold. Stars. Time for takeoff.
Freeze!
Take your true form. Do your masters. Not now. Cold. 9 seconds. Yahoo! Think you can get away?